How are you now? Broadcasting from the VFS studios in Sydney. You are listening to the all-new BIP Show, Season 6, Episode 3. Almost the last one of the year. We've got a couple of crackers ahead for you, though. We're not done yet for 2022. There's still a little bit left to give. Don't forget, hit subscribe, rate us, wherever you get your podcasts. And a reminder, all the financial information, if there is any, in this podcast is generally nature only. Speak to a professional advisor about your needs. That's me. If you want to talk to me, then go ahead and do it. My name is James Whelan. I'm the investment manager of VFS Group. Paul Colgan is back from Davos. Really enjoying that company. He's got stuck outside and his key card doesn't work. We're hoping that he'll make it into the office soon. The episode is being recorded in Sydney on the 25th of November 2022 AD. Now, kids, to cast your mind back, the year was 2020 and a small group of well-meaning men huddled up and recorded to put a podcast together to try and explain what was going on and how to navigate it successfully. Our fourth guest of that first season of the podcast was one of the most controversial that we've had. And I don't think we've been able to match it since I took over the show. However, we're gonna try for it. I don't think we need to really do it because actually if you listen back to that one, you go, that one actually wasn't as controversial as everyone thought it was at the time. And I'm just going to repeat the intro that we did then and see if there's been any amendments to it. So just bear with me, please, if for our guests can just indulge me on this one. As Paul Colgan read it, a BA in Econ and Law Ethics from Yale, PhD in Econ from the University of Maryland. Her work spans social influence, behavioural economics, corruption and Aussie policy, named Young Economist of the Year by the Economic Society of Australia in 2019. She runs a podcast called The Economist, or at least she did back in 2020. It is Professor Gigi Foster from the University of New South Wales. Dr. Foster, Professor Foster, how are you now?
I'm great, James. Thanks for having me back on.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's recap now. As much as I hate the sound of my voice, I actually had to bear with at least half of it to listen back to the one that we did in 2020. It was pretty spot on that the overreaction that we had to COVID was that. And I ask all of our guests to do so. I'm just going to leave it. Let's just open it up. The first question that Colgo asked you of that one was, and I'll quote, he actually said did, past tense, the lockdowns for coronavirus go too far. That was in June 2020. Can we just start with unpacking that? I'm just going to let you go.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, obviously it's been such a wild ride and we know what's happened since then. We've had even more lockdowns after that point. Obviously, I was hopeful as well that it was over, but I saw a lot of writing on the wall and was sort of wondering, puzzling out why were we still seeing the madness. I think it was around that time that I started to think about the possibility that it was more than just fear and temporary insanity, that we were going to be dealing with these policies for a long time. So I was very keen to get out the message that this was wrong. This was the wrong way. So that's why I was quite controversial at the time. I was going everywhere saying, hey, this is an overreaction. We need to not do this. Partly, I guess it was, instinctual, but it was more, I kind of coalesced on the idea after another couple of months that we had this herd that had formed, this crowd that had formed around the COVID obsession. And that was the thing that perpetuated the madness, as you know, into 2021. And even now in 2022, we still see a lot of people possessed by various aspects of the madness, wearing masks in their car, driving alone kind of thing, And kids who have learned the bad habits that have come with the last couple of years of disrupted schooling and business closures and not being able to see their friends and general stress and anxiety. These things do not breed good, confident, happy, joyful people. They breed scared, miserable, depressed, meaning looking people looking for meaning who don't have it. And so all of that was very troubling to me. I didn't foresee all of it at the time, but I could tell it was wrong. So, and of course, since that time, I've written 2 books. The first one with Paul Frieders and Michael Baker, entitled The Great COVID Panic, What Happened, Why, and What to Do Next. That came out in September of 2021. And then just most recently with Sanjeev Sablock, I've written a cost-benefit analysis of Australia's lockdown policies, which I was hoping the government would write, but of course it didn't come to the party. So we wrote it, and it's called Do Lockdowns and Border Closures Serve the Greater Good? and that is with Conner Court Press that came out, as I say, about a month ago. So both of those I've been, bringing with me as I go from interview to speech to keynote to address to podcast to all over the country. Now everybody wants to talk to me, of course, now, because it looks like I wasn't as far off as people seemed to think that I was in mid 2020.
That's. I think you were correct. I also think that there was a lot of people. We'll get to your book in a second, because I know that's actually sort of what I want to talk about that, because I think there's going to be more of this sort of thing that's going to go forward, especially since the die has been cast on this sort of thing. But I think that there was a lot of the sense that, okay, we've done the lockdown. That was supposed to stop the spread. That was supposed to sort of flatten the curve, as everyone said. But just that ongoing 2 years, do you think that and we'll talk, so this will lead us into the book conversation, but do you think that there's a feel that sort of people did this to themselves?
Well, I think that is the reality. Is there a feel of that? No, I think right now what I'm feeling anyway is that there is a humongous amount of pressure to memory hold the whole thing. Because psychologically, it's very confronting to admit that you either were part of something that was extremely damaging, or you were manipulated into doing things that were very much against your and your children's and your parents' and your friends' best interests by people in power, in positions of expert authority. So those are very shocking things for a person to admit. So from the mainstream side, I have seen mainly, well, it's exemplified by that Emily Oster article in The Atlantic recently.
About the amnesty.
Yeah, let's declare a pandemic amnesty. This idea, it's almost as if there's an analogy being drawn to somebody who wakes up after a drunken binge of festivities and has a headache, and it's sort of, well, I think I might have done some bad things. Maybe I killed one or two people, might have raped a couple, but you know what? Let's just move on. And that's puerile, right? I find, but it is kind of the reaction of someone who's waking up a bit in shock and not knowing how to handle that shock and how to reckon with their own actions during this period. So I think we're going to have a period of many months, maybe years, of real psychological confrontation for those people who were complicit, not just the people who were victims, but the people who actually did the doing.
Well, I think that it's phenomenal too in Victoria. And Victoria was, far and away the worst of the lockdowns. It wasn't just border closures; it was actually some pretty suppressive tactics that were used by that government of the day, which is still the government of today. And it looks like after tomorrow will continue to be the government of Victoria as well. Obviously the opposition is absolute basket case in Victoria, so don't worry about that. But do you think that the ongoing endorsement says more about? Well, I don't even know where to go with that one.
No, you're going in the right direction, because what you're trying to do, I think, is pick where actually is the pulse of the Australian population right now. Are they still actually tethered to this narrative that they were sold? Are they still psychologically committed to it, or are they actually ready to say no and to actually start a reckoning with their politicians, with their masters, with the people in authority, the supposed experts who tyrannized them during this period, to try to promote reconciliation and healing and moving forward together? And I honestly think it's a good place to look to the polls. You look and see who gets elected, and certainly during the 2020 and 2021 period, those politicians who were going super hard on all the lockdown and control-based rituals, they got elected with landslides and reelected with landslides. Dan Andrews, certainly, but also Mark McGowan. These people, and in fact, even Gladys Berejiklian left because of supposedly something else. It wasn't that she got polled out. It was absolutely something else. She lives a few streets away from me here, and it was bring her back. She'll be fine. It's okay. It's just like, no, that was some pretty bad stuff that happened, guys. Exactly.
But she saved us. And
when Don Perrottet came in, I think he also was able to make a bit more of an even fresher, than anybody else could, because he was new, and so that kind of helped, I think, to get New South Wales out of the madness more quickly than some of the other states. But I was just in Western Australia. I was actually on ABC Perth radio, and my goodness, the vitriol towards what I was saying was still very strong. This emotive rejection, and she shouldn't be talking. She doesn't have any right to have an opinion about anything medical, because she's an economist. Is she a Trump supporter? And she's just a crazy basket case. You shouldn't be giving her a platform. That stuff's still coming out over there. So, I think it's going to take a while. And I think we're not ready yet. No, Australia isn't at that place yet. Unlike other regions, some regions of the world, COVID's totally over. I mean, most places in Europe now, certainly Northern Europe, they've moved on. I wish we could, but, it'll be a little while yet, I think.
Well, and let's go into the book now. So some of the key themes that come out of this one, I haven't had a chance to pick it up yet, and I'm probably going to get it this afternoon. It's out now, isn't it? Yes.
So the lockdown CBA, yeah.
Yeah. So what are the key themes out of that?
So basically,
the cost-benefit analysis, right? I think
it's a cost-benefit analysis of Australia's lockdowns and border closures. And I wrote kind of a draft 4-pager that we expanded to form the book. I wrote that back in 2020, August 2020, and it was something I submitted to the Victorian Parliament, to their Parliamentary Accounts and Estimates Committee when I addressed them. And at that time, naively, I was still thinking that, they had just forgotten to do the thing that policies always have to be subjected to, which is to evaluate them, and that this is the way they need to evaluate the lockdown policy, and they should just do that. And now that, I'd reminded them that somehow they would go ahead and do that. Of course, that was so naive, but it didn't happen. And so I was waiting, obviously, for another year or more, and still nothing. And so I decided, with the help of Sanjeev, Sanjeev used to work for the Victorian Treasury. He's an economist himself as well, but in mid 2020, he was speaking out against what the state was doing, and the Treasury didn't like that very much, so they parted ways. So Sanjeev was sort of looking for some work, and I thought, great, you know exactly how these cost-benefit analyses typically get written, which they do about any number of policies that governments embark upon or are considering embarking upon within governments all around the Western world. And so he helped me to put together this expanded and enhanced version of the cost-benefit analysis, where we have to have a counterfactual. What would have happened if we hadn't had lockdowns? So for that, we take Sweden and also an alternative collection of other low restrictions countries from overseas, and we look at what their outcomes were in terms of COVID, and we population adjust and say, well, that's plausibly the amount that we could have potentially lost here in Australia if we had had those kinds of similar policies, which, by the way, were in line with our pre-2020 pandemic management plans, which never called for wholesale lockdowns of whole healthy populations to fight a respiratory virus. And then we actually go through all of the various categories of costs that the lockdowns and border closures imposed on Australia. And as you can imagine, there are a number of those categories. We do our best. You never know perfectly, when you're doing these kinds of analyses, you never have perfect information. So we estimate some things, but we do our best using the data that we've got. The biggest cost categories are actually, the first is the colossal amount of debt that's been accumulated, and the fact that will have to be paid off means we will have to crowd out future expenditure on everything that makes life longer and better. So, education, health, infrastructure, you name it, any government expenditure category gets cut. We're just going to be poorer, so we won't be able to afford as much. And secondly, the direct mental health costs of locking people in their homes, away from their friends and in a stressed state, not getting as much exercise, closing their businesses so they don't have a place to work. All those things naturally cause people to have stress, and that should count. That's pain. And so those two big categories amount to the vast majority of the costs of the lockdowns. But there are others too, such as taking kids out of school, crowded out healthcare for other things, so a range of different costs. And so at the end, the headline result is that our estimates, being generous to lockdowns, indicate that lockdowns have cost us 68 times what they could plausibly have delivered in terms of benefits.
That's an extraordinary number. I don't know if it sounds right or if it doesn't sound right. I've got nothing to judge it against, because it was the first time that's actually been done at that sort of scale. The inflationary pressure that's coming out now is also one that's to be factored in. The fact that so much free money was distributed, and that having that was obviously going to put an inflation spike up. The big they said it was going to be transitory. It obviously wasn't. I said it wasn't going to be either. And I was widely slammed for that too. I know how you feel to be out there, Dr. Foster. It's tough to be out there. I mean, it didn't go to the extent that, a current affair didn't. You always know when they want to portray someone as being evil, and not that you are. When they show someone walking in slow motion, that's how they portray someone to be evil. It's just like, this woman wants to kill your grandpa. It was I know. And it was just like, okay, that's a bit far.
I know. Maybe I shouldn't have worn red and black. That kind of played into the witch theme a little bit. And probably my accent doesn't help. People think of, American women sometimes as being kind of bitches on wheels. And so that maybe that doesn't help. But honestly, ask my best friends and my family. I am the most loving person that, you could imagine. Truly, this has been my motivation. I just love the country and I love people. And I hate to see this amount of pain being inflicted for just stupid reasons, for nothing that we can credibly claim is going to be worth it. And it's not that COVID isn't a thing. Obviously it is, but it's just one part of what health is all about. And to see that loss of perspective during that time, it pained me in the heart, And so I felt I had to use my platform to try to argue for it. And I'm just lucky to be a little bit, I don't know, what's the word, like resilient or resistant to social pressure, I guess you could say.
Oh, yeah, you got to have rubber skin.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, when you call me a neoliberal Trump cannot death cult warrior, it says more about you than it does about me. If you're going to call a fellow person that name, that moniker, then you have some serious internal reckoning to do, my friend, And so that was always my internal attitude about it. And I guess it didn't really get to me, And I was very lucky to have the support of all my family and good colleagues, obviously, like my co-authors on my books, to sanity check and support and just try to laugh about it a little bit, because otherwise you'd cry.
Yeah, and there's a lot to cry about. There still is a lot to cry about because we still haven't seen the full ramifications of it. And I want to talk about ramifications in a second, but just talking about you mentioned Trump as well. And I know that you've done a lot on behavioral, the behavioral side of things. That the fact that the Americans made it such a polarizing issue about if you're on this side, then you wear a mask, and if you're on the other side, then you don't. And we know that you're like there were people who were Republicans saying that we don't want to wear a mask because we don't want our friends thinking that we vote Democrat. And it's just, okay, you're insane. And
yeah, but this is the modern world right now. We have really lost the ability to appreciate that people who have different beliefs are still worthy of being included in our social circles and our ideas of what would be a plausible approach to a problem. We literally, that's what cancel culture is. It's saying, if you don't agree with me in terms of beliefs that I think are important right now, then I reject you as a human being. It's a pointing the bone, it's a collective ostracism. And that makes us so stupid as societies and even as people, individual people. When you stop challenging yourself and you stop challenging your beliefs, you become dumb. You stop thinking, basically. You just entrench yourself. You get lazy and you basically just sink into this progress oriented kind of luxurious feel-good state where everything is short-term and you're not able to really face future crises or challenges because you've excised all of the interesting, different, creative, innovative ideas from your circle because they're all canceled, right?
And that's correct. That is where we're going, and that's where we're heading. And as more people say that social media and the platforms that there are, where everyone is now communicating, that they have more control and they get regulated, and they've got to actually now do this on behalf of people. Of governments, which is it's infuriating in that direction. But you're also in the name of trying to protect people. There's an expression which it may be someone's, it probably is, but I'm just going to hack it myself and say that it is something that I just made up. But obviously that truth and your beliefs should not fear the daylight, and that's something that we have lost the ability to hear someone else's point of view on something and bring it up into the light and go, you know what, I'm going to dismiss it. It means that I may think less of you because I've held it up to the light and I think that you're wrong on this one, which makes you probably, I could think less of you. But there's no reason why I should dismiss you as a human being. I can think you're a dumbass. By all means.
And that's perfectly, and that's your right. You can say, look, I just think you're wrong. That's totally fine. There is actually one organization in Australia that's trying to do that. And I was just speaking with them a few days ago up in Brisbane. It's called the Brisbane Dialogues. You may be aware of it. Your listeners might be interested. It's, as far as I know, it's the only Australia-based kind of organization that's explicitly and violently politically independent that is trying to elevate the quality of public dialogue across the aisles of various sorts on issues of social import. So they had dialogue on how to manage the next pandemic. I was a panelist, as were 3 other people, and then there was also a moderator. And we definitely disagreed with each other about what should have been done, and we were able to respectfully discuss that issue. And that was honestly the first time that in public I've been able to, have that conversation with people who are on the other side, because during this whole COVID period, numerous times, either, I've been brought on as the token Christian in a bunch of lions to be devoured, like on ABC Q&A, for example.
Good metaphor.
Right. Right. Which is really just, and that's just a playing gotcha kind of thing. Or when we've actually suggested that there be a long form discussion to people who are on the other side, they have refused to come on with me. So there's been basically no opportunity to truly get into those issues, the complexity and the density of the problems that we were dealing with during this time, and how we could have handled it differently, and what actually happened after what we did, and how we should see the whole thing, like with this crowd dynamic that I mentioned to you. So I was really gratified that the dialogues were able to put that event on, and they're hoping to do another series continuing series of discussions about pandemic policy over the coming months, maybe a year or so, all over Australia. So, hopefully watch this space. Hopefully there'll be more even in this state where we can have those kinds of conversations.
Well, I would look forward to going to Brisbane, except Brisbane is on my do not go to list because it's in Queensland. So Queensland and Western Australia have to do a lot to get back in my good books after what they did during COVID. Talking about long term, now you mentioned the next pandemic. I'll make a link to the Brisbane Dialogues on the website too, so that people can go and find out what it's all about, because I really enjoy that sort of stuff as well. We need to be having these conversations.
Yeah.
The long term and going forward, China now sort of going in the economic side of things. I was saying, I was loud and proud, and it's okay to be wrong. It's sort of, what we're all human, and we're all sort of in this game. But I was saying that after the Chinese, the Communist Party Congress that was on just recently, that after that, and President Xi, consolidating his power with an indefinite term as his next president, that COVID zero would start to be unwound, vaccination rates, and that they would start to change these things. A lot of banks were saying that as well. So, I mean, it wasn't just me that was out there on my own on the precipice on this one. They have not done that yet.
No.
And in fact, it looks like it's not only the case numbers of records. Don't worry about death counts, because we know that there's no way that only one person has died this week from COVID in China. I think
exactly. Yeah.
But
the data are very sus, yes.
Very, very sus, which has always been the case in China anyway. So there's no surprises there, economic or otherwise. But do you think that China is potentially when does that change for China?
Well, so China is such an interesting case in this whole thing, because they started the whole lockdown mania, right, with locking down Wuhan, and I think that really committed them, because of the way that Chinese culture and the politics there work. It committed them to this sort of approach indefinitely, ad infinitum, whenever they have an upsurge that can't be hidden or squashed or swept under the rug. So the lockdowns of Shanghai and Beijing were, in some sense, if anything, just a proving ground for the local politicians to show how high their allegiance was to the party. Because in China, you can't be seen to go against the party leaders, right? The party leaders must not be ever depicted as having potentially been wrong. It's this extreme fanatical orientation towards what you were talking about earlier, not being able to be seen as somebody who made a mistake, right? And that's how the whole system has functioned during the COVID period, and they just cannot walk it back for political face reasons. And you say this, and as a Westerner, you're like, oh yeah, okay, but that's just face. What about the reality? What about the actual economics? What about the fact that they're destroying themselves? Well, that doesn't matter to a point. It just doesn't. I mean, this is a country that had the Cultural Revolution, right? I mean, millions of people have died by the hand of policies that have been pursued for just completely political, face-saving reasons that were ideologically oriented and about making sure that people couldn't disagree. And then what happened at the very, very end, when there's enough destruction that's finally happened, is that the story changes slightly somehow to protect the face, right? So it's a change in the political message, just a pivot, so that they find a way somehow to make it such that there can be a plausible argument that the party really has always been right, but we're still going to go in this different direction now, because now this is the right thing for some other reason. Yeah, that is what I expect. It's very kind of Orwellian, really. The party is right about whatever until such time as the party wants to change its mind, and in which case then the party is right again, right? That's what they would like as a political face. And that's, unfortunately, of course, we followed the lockdown thing, and to a certain extent, the Western politicians as well. became beholden to that whole narrative as well, which is one of the reasons I was pushing for a new political narrative here, 18 months ago, because we could have done it. We could have pivoted in that way and said, well, we tried the best we could with the data at the time, but now we know more, and now we're just going to go out of this. And that would have saved so many lives, and we didn't do that.
It did, but I think that we're in the world where if you change, people don't understand that if the facts change, I change. What do you do, sir? You know that beautiful quote that everyone uses.
Exactly. Yep.
That now people don't accept that. I know this from a financial perspective, that if all of a sudden I'm just like, you know what, I don't like this stock or this ETF, or I don't like this market anymore, and people will say, you got it wrong. It's just like, no, it literally stuff has changed. The narrative, it doesn't stay the same the entire way through.
That's right.
It's potentially it's all of our fault maybe, and I hate to be the guy that's blaming the media, but that the whole gotcha thing that the media has become famous for, and also people in response as well, has become a little bit too much. It stopped the ability for people to say, you know what, we've got some new data, we've got some new facts here. We need to, and this is the way that we need to go. Because then all of a sudden it's, he's flip-flopping, he doesn't change, he can't make his mind up or anything like that. It's like, no, that's what leadership looks like.
That's very true. That's very true. And I think it comes, in a sense, that kind of obsession with the sticking to it at all costs comes from, in part, maybe an insecurity or a sort of lack of vision of what leadership really is, and what authority and good governance really look like. And because we've lost that model in Australia, I think, and a lot of places in the world, they're struggling to understand what a real leader looks like. And some of the best leaders that I see right now in the world are actually in the resistance. They're people who are playing from their heart. They're prepared to be wrong, but they are, putting it all on the line, sacrificing their careers, their reputation to do what they think is right. And they're making the actions that they think will save the most lives. I mean, if that's not heroism, what is?
Yeah, it's very well said. Very well said. What's your most controversial view at the moment? External. I mean, what else are you sort of doing that's ex-COVID at the moment?
Ex-COVID. Well, I tell you what, I'm doing an awful lot that is COVID. I mean, I'm doing about an average of one interview or podcast or event or something per day. So that's kind of a lot of stuff. I am also working on some experiments in relation to power, because one of the things that should be clear after this couple of years is we need to study power more. We need to get a better understanding of it, and we need to incorporate that understanding into our education for our kids. I'm also interested in trying to develop some alternative education modules, systems that people can sort of download if they're interested in trying to take their kids out of school, and how can that, what can they follow that would actually have been vetted by sensible people who, using Enlightenment thinking and, principles of classic liberalism. And I see that in other places as well. There's a new book series, or not that new, but somewhat new, called The Tuttle Twins, which has been written by people just fed up with the kind of literature that's been produced, particularly recently for their small children. And it's, it essentially teaches how societies work, but to small children, right? Using the kinds of tools that work there. I think that's a very exciting area. And I've always done research on education policy pretty much ever since I got out of graduate school. So I'm always interested in education. Yeah. And I've also done some time use studies of what's happens during COVID in universities. And so sort of busy writing that up now to the extent that I have extra time, but also just doing my teaching. I'd actually like to just be a regular research and teaching academic again after, some period of time, whenever I can get back to it. I was not planning this sort of 2 years of wild ride in the media and so much engagement. But I'd also really like to get some people from my department back able to talk to me about this stuff, because at the moment, and this is not just in my department, but throughout economics in Australia, we haven't had yet a real reckoning with what happened. And there was an awful lot of bullying and pillorying within the profession. And I have a paper just about that, which is, I think, about to get accepted. And that, I hope, will be the start of a conversation within the academy. And probably other professions need to have that conversation too, saying, okay, here is a table on which we can put the pain of this period. You can say, you bullied me. You were, you ad hominem attacked me when I was simply making points that in 2019 would have been self-evident. And, you need to acknowledge that and have the other side look at that and acknowledge it and be able to maybe apologize. It would be nice, but I'm not really holding my breath for that. But just to be able to start that process, right? Because we need to work together as a profession going forward. I don't want to be constantly seen as the outcast or, outlier economist, which I kind of am still. So I'd like to have some healing there as well.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think that for as much as the people who were wrong in what they did are still where they are. I don't think the apology is going to be coming anytime soon, although it would be nice. And there was a few things. I mean, I've put it behind me as well. I wasn't really that far out on the ledge, but apparently, I mean, I went out there saying that interest rates going to 4 or 5% was a possibility in this year, and I was just slammed left, right, and centre from anyone with, as an economist, just absolutely body slammed me for that. And it did actually make me, because I'm not an economist at a big bank. I'm not that guy. I'm just a simple innocent man. And it did detriment me a little bit. I don't think I'm going to get an apology from anyone, but that's the game. That's just that's where it is. You say stuff and you eat it. However, in education, at a university level, that should be a sin.
Yes. Well, I have felt this whole time that part of our responsibility as economists, who are funded by the state, by the way, right, by the society of taxpayers, is to provide guidance and engagement and insight about Australian policy on behalf of those taxpayers. We have a duty to that. That's a part of our professional job. And unfortunately, in economics over the last 30 years or so, it's become very, very siloed into hyper specialized areas where you get people making whole careers on just studying the properties of one type of game, and what happens in that game and how many equilibria are there, and what if we enhance it slightly this way or that way. And this is, a game that doesn't necessarily have any bearing on reality at all. And it's not that blue sky research isn't valuable, but it's just the scale of the loss of the ability to comment intelligently on whole of society policy is staggering. And I think that's another thing that fed in here, is a lot of people simply weren't competent to actually understand what was happening, because they had been led by their education and their career incentives to hyper specialize so greatly that their brains were no longer really thinking about the big picture on an everyday basis. And you see this even overseas, when people who have become specialists and even gotten Nobel Prize for their specialties are then assumed to know something about the rest of the world, and they can be seduced into giving commentary on, big policy issues that they really don't have any expertise in, but they're branded as an expert. Yeah, well, are they really an expert on that broad picture? Not really. They're kind of an expert on whatever they got the Nobel Prize for, So that is a real problem, and not just in economics, but in science as a whole. And that's another thing that I hope to make some progress on in future. But that's a real cultural shift issue, and of course involves some kind of institutional change. And there's a number of suggestions for institutional change in the Great COVID Panic that I've also been blogging about more with my co-authors, Paul Freiders and Michael Baker, on the Brownstone Institute website. I definitely recommend that website to your readers or your listeners, because
you've got to send me these links. I can't write this. You're talking so fast. It's all right.
Yeah. I know. It's easy. It's brownstone.org, and they put up blogs about all different areas of and aspects of the COVID period and what we need to do going forward. And so I do expect I'll probably be involved in some of the rebuilding that needs to happen after this period. And there's a number of different irons in the fire on that one.
Excellent. Now, I just sort of crystal balling this one, the biggest irony would be that as a people, that the next pandemic picks up, or the next big thing picks up, and we decide to completely ignore it and not do enough. And you can see that happening, can't you? That it would be. Oh, no.
I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's likely, because I think there's so many people now who are really just looking for the next way to continue to exert their power so they don't lose it. And that is the natural human reaction. So I think the not taking power at a time of crisis is almost unheard of. If you can take power, you do. And you always just say, oh, this time it's different. You know that phrase, right? That's always what's bandied about. Okay, well, COVID, we locked down, whatever, maybe it was a mistake. But this time, look at those numbers. Look at that projection. See, it's different, and that will be the way it goes.
And then always have to find an enemy, and that sometimes those are individuals. Well, it was an entire country for a very long time, and that's I think the relations with China. Well, it's difficult to we're not going to go down that path. We don't have the time. Now, Dr. Foster or Gigi or Professor or whatever it is, to take your pick on that one. How can people get their hands on this book?
So you can buy The Great COVID Panic on Amazon. That's an easy one. And for Do Lockdowns and Border Closures Serve the Greater Good, just go to Connor Court Press, their website, and you can order it from there.
I am on that website right now, as there is, and I'm going to get that in my basket. I'm going to link all this to the website as well, everything that you've said as well. I'm actually also on Sanjeev's blog.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Sanjeev Sablock's blog there. Staunch libertarian, I'm noticing here as well.
He is a bit of a libertarian, yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
All
Okay.
of us in the resistance, I think, have streaks of libertarianism, because that was part of what we reacted against with all the authority coming down. But many people are really disaffected lefties or disaffected righties, from particular camps, and they just realize, look, we just can't be so obsessive about whatever it is that determines that side of politics. We have to be more in the center. We have to be more welcoming. We have to be more tolerant of other people, and kind of more hands off about the way the government does things, which I think is great. I mean, that is kind of where we are at the moment in the West. The governments have overreached so much that the only really rational path is to try to move towards a system of more dissemination of power, rather than working against basically the concentration of power that has led to so much destruction, as party to so much destruction during this period. And again, there's a number of ideas about how to do that, and I'd encourage your listeners to get involved at the local community level. There's so many different new resistance organizations popping up all over the place. You can be part of them. You can put your hands to the wheel and work together for a brighter, better kind of future institution set for Australia and for your kids.
Yeah, well said, well said. I've had a little bit to do with the libertarian movement now for a while. It's sort of something that I inherited just going through. The biggest difficulty with the libertarian movement is trying to organize them. You know why?
Exactly. That's the thing.
Because
they're all libertarians, right? I know. Exactly.
It's like herding cats.
Yeah, it is like herding cats. And this is the thing, if you get the disaffected lefties, they also understand that there is a role for government. There is a role for coordination. The problem is that when you coordinate people and you concentrate the power of those people into too small number of hands, right? Too few hands, then you have a problem. So what you need to do is work out ways to retain the voice and power of the actual citizens that are coordinating together in the decisions that are made. So for that reason, we, for example, talked about citizen juries, appointing leaders of our bureaucracies as one of the antidotes that one could imagine, one of the small changes to our institutions going forward that would react, to this concentration of power and the abuse of power that we've seen. But there are a number of other kinds of sort of direct democracy kinds of initiatives that I think would also be very helpful. And so that, figuring that out, puzzling that out, what will work in Australia, what actually suits our communities, that's the job of the next few years.
Not bad at all. Finally, Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you, and to you. I understand you're having your turkey today. We had ours late yesterday. I'm
having my turkey. My turkey day is on Sunday, believe it or not. So nice. I do mine later. It's a good chance to try and drag the family in and some friends around the place, drink some Budweiser, and watch the college football. So it's all pretty good. I've got.
Yeah, very good. Well, very happy to know that. We had a lovely family Thanksgiving as well. So that's a lovely tradition to be able to maintain here. And hello to all the American expats. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving as well.
Yeah, that's right. Did you get some turkey? How did you prepare your turkey?
Oh yeah, always roasted turkey. Always roasted. I actually baked the pumpkin the day before. I had to get my partner to bake it because I was flying back from Brisbane. And then we got the flesh out, and then we made the pumpkin. I made the pumpkin pie and the cranberry sauce in the morning. And then the turkey went in with the stuffing, and then made cauliflower cheese, green beans, sweet potatoes, and mashed potatoes. I think that was it. Oh, and then, some whipped cream for the pumpkin pie. So
yeah. I've got to try. I've never done pumpkin pie before, so the tradition that I've got, along with drinking Budweiser and watching the game, is I do the turkey, but everyone brings a side. So I've had a couple of people. The potluck. Yeah. It does ease because I can't cook, as everyone knows. I mean, so that's where it's going. The one thing I set a really low benchmark of just not killing my family. That's the benchmark. And if I can get through that, I'm absolutely winning the day, and it's okay. And since I'm on turkey duty, I mean I'm running a pretty high risk game. So it's. But anyway,
I'm sure you'll be fine.
Yeah, I know. The irony of getting through 2 years of lockdown just to be killed by a family member is just accidentally by eating some not cooked turkey is something else. But look, I'm gonna give it my all and do my best at this one and see how we go. But it's a good little tradition that we've got, and people need this. We need these sorts of things. So
we do.
Yeah, a chance to get people together. Now, I'm looking forward to catching up with you, getting a beer in like we did 2 years ago. Yep. And I'll do that. I'm also looking forward to getting you back on the show too after that. Okay.
Yeah, terrific. It's great to be on, James, and good luck with you. And I think it's great that you're continuing this podcast, and more new media channels are always better. So yeah, go for it.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Foster. Now I'm going to wrap it up. You can. Oh, I've already. There's the wrap up. It's done. No, we're done. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Foster.
Thanks so much for having me, James. Bye.
Get on here. Talk to you later. You too. Bye. You can find us on iTunes at The BIP Show or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Twitter at @the_BIP_show, and we're on Facebook too. Just search for The BIP Show. I've got a website, Just Google Whelan Capital. It's got all of the links and all of the documents that you want to know. Individually, I am at James Whelan42 on Twitter. The show is produced by whoever I could find on the day. Thank you very much. We'll catch you next time.